Broadcasting from the studio at the Levan Center of Innovation at Nova Southeastern University, welcome to Levan Center Live, featuring rockstar entrepreneurs, innovators, and those that foster the Florida business ecosystem.
Hi, and welcome back to Levan Center Live. Welcome back, subscribers, and thanks again for tuning in. Remember, if you're a first-timer, please like, share, and subscribe to the Levan Center Live podcast. I'm Jim Ryan. Of course, I'm joined here at the Levan Center of Innovation with my good friend, Kelly Shanley. Kelly, it's so great to be with you again.
Good to be with you, my friend.
So we've got a fantastic podcast. Again, we always talk about those that are sort of innovating, stimulating the ecosystem here for startups, entrepreneurs, and we've got a great guest today, Julia Lucidi, and I love that Italian name. It's so fun to say. And Julia, thanks for taking the time to be on the podcast today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I'm super happy to be here.
So you are the founder of Fort Lauderdale Tech Meetups, and I've known Julia for some time now when she was a burgeoning entrepreneur and kind of starting this ecosystem. I want to talk about that, talk about your background, of course, and what you've seen over the several years now and how the ecosystem has matured. So let's wind the clock back a little bit. Talk about your background, because I know you also spent some time working at the Cambridge Innovation Center down in Miami. So maybe we kind of start from there and kind of work your way up a little bit to more modern times now working with those tech meetups.
If you don't mind, I'd like to start even further back.
Let's go back further.
My life story is just so deeply integrated with also what I do for work and what I've decided to do as an entrepreneur. So I was originally born in Brazil, in the south of Brazil, in a small city called Apucarana in Paraná. And my dad had the dream of living in the United States. And he got a job in the US, and we immigrated here when I was 6 months old. So we moved to Atlanta, Georgia. My mom, my dad, my sister, and I was just a little baby. So I was raised in Atlanta until I was 7. And then when I was 7, we moved to Mexico City, and I lived in Mexico City for 4.5 years. After those 4.5 years, we moved back to the US. I was then a preteen and completely in love with what I experienced in Mexico. I just longed to leave the US again. And I did middle school, high school, finished college. I studied PR and public relations, and I just had this dream of leaving the US and really having that Latin American experience again. And I thought to myself, well, I'm Brazilian, and I've never really lived in Brazil. I just spent my summers there, and I felt like I really needed to go live in my country and have that experience, learn how to samba, improve my Portuguese. And so I started looking for a job in Brazil, and I got a job at a nonprofit organization called Endeavor, which a lot of folks in the startup community
Very familiar with it, sure.
know about it. But back then I had no idea what it was. But it ended up being so pivotal and really an anchor to what my career then became after that. Because Endeavor, for those listening that maybe don't know, is a nonprofit organization present in over 40 countries that supports high growth entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurs that are growing more than 20-25% per year, that are, going through this big growth spurt and need additional support to not fail and break, right? And I had the opportunity to join their team and work in shifting the entrepreneurial culture in Brazil. So in Latin America, a lot of the culture is much more conservative in nature when it comes to what you're going to do as a profession. So a lot of people look to get more stable jobs, like become a doctor or a lawyer or work for the government. Becoming an entrepreneur, it was, crazy 10, 15 years ago, and often associated with being corrupt. And so our job at that time in that season for Brazil's, history and culture was shifting that mindset into seeing entrepreneurship as a positive thing. So we led incredible projects. We were responsible for Global Entrepreneurship Week in Brazil. So we mobilized 4 million people out of their homes and into events every year, every November. And really seeing the power that we were able to shift the culture, working in partnership with large broadcasting stations and thousands of local partners, really taught me the power of community and how to build and shift a culture, right? And so after that became kind of my banner of what I love to do. And I found myself working with entrepreneurs, and I found it to be very fulfilling, that like super adventurous spirit and kind of the crazy ones. And after that, I went to go work for the government of Rio. I went to go work for the Coca-Cola company, all focusing on working with entrepreneurs. And after 6 years living in Brazil, working between Rio and São Paulo, I missed the US and wanted to move back. And I had never lived in South Florida. And when my husband said he got a job here, I was like, man, what are we going to do in South Florida? Like, I don't know what there is tech related. And so I started looking for an opportunity to plug in with the entrepreneurship community, which is when I came across the Cambridge Innovation Center.
Around what year was that when
that was,
transition?
I moved here in 2017. And I started working with the Cambridge Innovation Center in 2019. And I joined their sales team. And right away, I fell in love with the space. Unfortunately, they're no longer present here in South Florida. But if you ever go to Cambridge, Massachusetts, you'd be able to visit their locations, their sites. They're a co-working space focused on innovation-based companies. And as soon as I came in, I saw like a blank canvas to create something in this space. I just saw an incredible community with so many amazing entrepreneurs, an incredible team. And even though I was on the sales team, I was already like starting to think about ways that I could add value in a different way. And since I speak Spanish, Portuguese, and English, they would hand all the international clients to me, which was fine. And it was fun. And it allowed for me to do a lot of market research. I was having these conversations and understanding what these international founders needed. And so I started to notice they all had the same needs, right? Either it was understanding the legal land of the US, tax, hiring, pitching. And I thought to myself, wow, I could help them a lot faster if this was, everybody together in a room and if we had this more set up like a program. So at CIC, I developed their first international soft landing program, so the first educational program for international founders. I ran 7 cohorts, worked with 100 founders, and did that all the way through when CIC shut their doors in 2022 here in Miami. And that's when I decided to start my own company. So I'll pause there so I don't like ramble on for too long. But
so the economics around innovation centers, co-working spaces, I mean, what I've found in researching them is that, like, if you've seen one, you've seen one. They're all sort of different. So do you understand that, like, what were the strategic reasons or financial reasons or whatever they were that CIC pulled out? And what do you think that means for the rest of us who are still present in this system? Like, what we should learn from that or focus on?
Yeah. So I was a CIC employee, so I can't like go deep into the strategic reasons, right? Why CIC decided to close their offices here in South Florida. But I will tell you that as a ecosystem here in South Florida, it was a big loss for our community because it really was an anchor in a space where a lot of innovators, people curious about innovating, founders, and people interested in being around those people were getting together and working on a daily basis and rubbing shoulders. And it helped that it was really well located, right? Yeah. So it was in the Allapattah region, right close to Wynwood. So it was a very central location. So I feel like South Florida needs to find that space and that hub again where we can be rubbing shoulders more often. And really, whenever I left CIC back in 2022, when they announced that they were closing, I immediately knew that it was time for me to start my company. And I wasn't really sure where to start or where I was going to go. And
was this going to be your first time being an actual entrepreneur at this point?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that my work prior to that really prepared me for this moment because I always had a very innovative driven profile of like creating new things and building new things. That's always what I wanted to pursue whenever I was in the corporate world. And so I think that that's a great flag that you have something in you that could be, stepping into entrepreneurship. But at that time, I really wasn't sure what I was going to do. And I actually think that that's kind of a good thing. I think that if you really have figured out like what product or service you're going to have, like maybe you haven't, kind of tested out the market enough to really get that feedback. And I was struggling with where to start, with what to do. I was feeling really lonely in that process. And I thought that something was wrong with me. I'm like, man, like I'm having like anxiety, bouts of depression, but then I came upon an important reflection that there was a value system that was blindsiding me. And you see, our American culture is driven by the value of independence. And I think that that value is incredible and has brought us very far along as a culture and brought us a lot of advantages and great things. But every good value, when taken to an extreme, can become a bad thing. If you're too generous and you give away all your money, you're not going to be able to pay your mortgage or your car, whatever it might be, your gas. In the same way with independence, when taken to an extreme, can also become a bad thing. And what I started to realize this, and I started to reflect on the fact that we were really designed to be in community and to build in community. Faith is a really big part of my journey, and Kelly knows this. We've talked a lot and have some deep conversations about that. But really what the Bible says is that in Proverbs 27:17 is, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. And so as founders, I really believe that it's important for us to lean into this aspect of community. And so American culture, I think has shifted away, or perhaps never ultimately really deeply carried those elements of community super deeply, as we see in other cultures. And so I started to, notice that I needed to rescue this element of community. And that's really where I had this insight of like, okay, I'm going to start Founder Tactics. It's what I want to do through Founder Tactics is establish and fuel founders with community. And how can I do this, right? So I started by doing it for myself. I noticed that I had a personal need to be around more founders and to connect with other founders. So I started to look for a spot where I could host a meetup, because I thought, surely there's another founder out there that could benefit from being with another founder, grabbing a drink and supporting one another. And I started planning the first Fort Lauderdale Tech meetup in the end of 2022. It was literally December, probably nobody was working, but I just, when you have that spark and you just know what you want to go after and you just, you can't stop. And so even though it was kind of the holiday break, I was, running around town, figuring out how I was going to do this. I launched the first meetup and I put out the invitation. And usually meetups start with maybe like 5, 15 people. And that's really what I expected, for us to have something small, maybe grow in a year to 100 people. Well, the first meetup had 120 people in attendance.
Wow.
And so it really goes to show that there was a shared need in the community. And so we started to meet on a monthly basis, and I started to understand who was coming, and I started speaking to sponsors, and it became a model, right? It became a business model where I was building community and being able to do that in a sustainable way for my company as well. So that's where that first piece of the tech meetup started.
So I'm interested in, there's kind of an insight you had there about what's really necessary, like what's the ball game here relative to the culture.
Mm-hmm.
Is that based on like your experience in Brazil? Is it just kind of your ability to look at a situation? And I guess what I'm really trying to get at is, do you feel like your experience in Brazil gives you some sort of different perspective that helps you now in this environment?
I think my experience in Brazil shaped me as a professional. It showed me what it looks like to build with excellence. I worked around so many incredible professionals that in a lot of ways I still carry their way of building with me and the way I do things. And it showed me that it's possible to shape a culture. Yeah. And whenever we moved back to the US, some of the experiences that I had here really taught me about community, but actually not from a business perspective at all. So my husband and I joined a church, and it was actually pretty far away from our house. And we had been praying to find a church that was closer so that it was more feasible, right? Maybe like a 20-minute drive or something like that. And a pastor moved down from Indianapolis and joined our church and said, we're planting this church in North Miami at the time. And our current pastor said, we would love for some of our members to leave and help start this church. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this is how this prayer is being answered. Like, I didn't really want to plant a church, but it just, we felt like peace, and we felt like it was the right thing to do. It was what we needed, was a much closer community. And so we jump on board to plant a church with 12 other people. And so in this process, Pastor Eric starts teaching us about what a healthy community looks like as a church, and our role, and how, what is God's role in community and fueling that community, and teaching all of these principles that he started to show and apply in a church setting. And I think one of the biggest things that impacted me personally in that journey was the elements of hospitality, and just really putting your ego and your goals aside to serve people. And I think a lot of people will go to church on a Sunday thinking, what can I get out of this for me? And really I started shifting into the mindset of like, how can I serve people? And so I brought that along into the tech meetup as well, right? And so whenever we had a massive amount of people sign up, we had 350 registrations and 120 people signed up. I thought the hospitality needs to be amazing, and we really need to serve people well when they come into this space. So I think there's a lot of elements about church planting, and specifically the intentionality that our pastor had in teaching us what community looks like, really influenced. And also, I've been training martial arts for over 15 years. I trained a martial art called capoeira. It's the Brazilian dance fight. I don't know if you guys have ever heard about it.
Yep. YouTube.
Yeah. And there's a lot of elements of community in capoeira. And there's a hierarchical structure. There's, children. There's older people, experienced people, and understanding how to integrate and include everyone, I think, in that patchwork of community, right? Instead of like only focusing on one person or one area that we think is super important. Community is a lot more complex than that. And so I just have it really as a mission to lead a kind of work that leverages community as a whole. And I'm honestly learning what that looks like too, even though I've been doing this for quite some time, but I'm learning.
It's interesting, combining church and Brazilian martial arts as influencers into a tech meetup.
I know.
Sort of not necessarily intuitive to combine those, but you pulled out some parts from each and said, look, I like the idea of hospitality. Tactically, how do we do this? Being a servant leader to this group.
Yes.
So let's talk about the tech meetups a little bit, because it seems like you started this off, and it obviously it's going remarkably well right now, and you got to be quite proud of how it's sort of grown from where you originally started from. What draws the audience to the tech meetups themselves? So you mentioned you and the things that you've brought in.
Yeah.
What are the people that are joining the tech meetups? What are they expecting, and what are they receiving themselves out of these meetups?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple layers to that question. One is, I'm not sure if you're asking how do we attract as many people as we do, or if you're asking what's the intention of the people who come, or is it both?
Maybe a little bit of both, but really on the latter. So what's drawing them to be? Are they doing it to be around like-minded people? Are they doing it for jobs? Are they doing it for networking? What's their motivations?
I think there's a mix of motivations, and I'm always looking to have these conversations with people, because every month we get anywhere from 120 to 200 people coming to the meetup. So there's a lot of people that are first timers, and I'm getting to know why they're coming, right? But I think folks are coming because they're looking to network, first of all. It's super important, especially now with the economy feeling, not super stable, or people unsure of what's going to happen. I think networking is super important. Like, it's the way that you maintain doors open, that you stay relevant, and I think people recognize the importance of that. Now that we've been hosting at the Flow building for over a year now. We also do live podcast recordings at the Tech Meetup where we talk about different topics, in the market, be it AI, climate tech, health tech, first-time founder failures we had last month. And so being able to have these intentional conversations and understand what's happening in the market and learn from other people, I think is really valuable as well. And when you look at kind of the segmentation, let's say, of the people who are coming to the Tech Meetup, we have 30% are startups, 30% are corporate leaders of large tech companies. We have 20% service providers and 14 to 15% investors, and the rest is other, right? So there's a blend of people who are building companies and looking for support, and a blend of people who are attending that are looking to connect. And that's actually a really great blend for founders too, right? Because if you get access to a corporate tech leader or maybe to a small business or a service provider that can support you. So I think all of these things are adding a lot of value. And the feedback that I hear from people is, wow, there's a really this is a really genuine space. I don't feel like people are trying to sell themselves. I feel like people are looking to make honest connections and support each other. And so I think that environment that is very supportive and collaborative ends up being very attractive and brings people back and attracts more people.
So you almost got to my question at the end of that there. So what I was wondering, we've used the word network, we've used the word community. And I was wondering if you felt there was any sort of qualitative difference between those two ideas, like what really makes a community versus a network. Is there any difference? And then you went to the word genuine and the way people were feeling about what was happening when they showed up there.
Yeah.
So is that intentionally what you're trying to do? Do you think of a difference between those two words, or qualitatively think of community in a certain way that differentiates it?
Yeah, this is great because I've actually been giving some thought to this. And yes, I think that people sometimes view network as kind of like the business cards that you have or the people that you can reach out to. Mm-hmm. To me, community is the next step of your network. It's when there are deeper connections and there's more like flow between those relationships. And it's not so much driven about like, what am I going to get out of this? But it's a little bit more altruistic in nature. Yeah. And I feel like sometimes with network, it can be measured by, what am I going to get out of it? Yeah. And community will actually give you much more if you stop looking for what am I going to get out of it. So I think the process of stepping from network to community is being a little bit more open-handed, more generous, and thinking more of others. And I really believe that naturally that starts to come back to you. Yeah. And so that's what I've experienced.
So how do you create that difference when you're trying to build a community? Jim kind of talked about why people are showing up, and you talked about people are sensing this sort of genuine connection with people, that it's leaning more towards community and that's beneficial. How do you do that?
Yeah. I think that intentions matter a lot. Yeah. When we do things and we have a certain intention behind it, those intentions show. We may not think that they show, but they do. Yeah. So if you meet with someone, or even if you're starting a meetup, because people have asked me, man, I want to start a meetup. And I always ask them, why? Yeah, why do you want to start a meetup? And so, or a community, or whatever it may be. And if the answer is, because I want something out of it for me, or I want to sell, or I want to recruit, or I want, if it's something that's for you, I think that it's harder for you to transmit true value and for people to connect with what you're doing. I think people really are looking for authenticity and vulnerability. And, I think that is sensed when people are building community. So if I go to a place and really their objective is just to sell their software and they're doing this happy hour because of that, it transmits, and it transmits in those relationships. And this is where I also go back to hospitality. I don't think that there's like an easy answer for this. But I think that the intentionality placed in hospitality, which means how people feel arriving to your event or to whatever space that you've created. Do they feel lost? Are they unsure of where they're going? Is there poor signage? When they step in the door, how are they greeted? What is there to offer them in that process? I think it all impacts how people are going to interact in the space that you provide for them, right?
Love that. Absolutely.
How often are you doing the tech meetups now? Is this thing, is the organization materialized and in such a way, you know, are you a solopreneur right now? You know, how are you getting volunteers to help support the organization? Because it seems in some cases somewhat daunting. You mentioned you get organizing a podcast.
Yeah.
I know from I'm on the newsletter. You know, about you have panelists that come.
Yeah.
You know, I see you on LinkedIn on supporting that. How often are the meetings? So kind of tear up a little bit about, tear down sort of the structure of the organization itself.
Yeah, sure. So the Fort Lauderdale Tech Meetup takes place every second Tuesday of the month from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. at the Flow Building. It is right over by Riverwalk next to the wharf, Pura Vida.
In downtown Fort Lauderdale.
Downtown Fort Lauderdale, yeah. So I invite everybody to come and join us. You can go to fortlauderdaletechmeetup.com to get more information. But that's my quick plug. Yes, I am a solo founder, and you know, by God's grace, a lot of incredible people have come to partner and support me. One is my husband. He has a full-time job, but he takes off one vacation day per day to help me operationally at the meetup, which is great and such a game changer for me. He's also available 24/7, literally to advise me and, you know, talk through all the gut-wrenching decisions you have to make as a founder a lot of times, right? And you know, we stayed at our first space was the Fitz Bar, and we then moved to the Flow Building in May of last year of 2024. And that was a really big game changer for us because the Flow Building became a partner as well. So they have part of their team that help us like set up and operate the space while we're there. So that has been a really big value add-on for us as far as the day of the event. And we work with 10 student volunteers from Broward College every month. And these student volunteers help us usher in 150 to 200 people every month to the meetup, which is no small feat. And
and by the way, they do exactly what you were just describing in terms of, you know, you've trained them well and they get it. They're out front, they're welcoming people in. It's really kind of seamless and lovely, I think is the word.
Yeah, they're incredible, and I think a lot of people are a little bit hesitant to work with this generation of professionals, like just now entering the market. I mean, they're still in college, most of them, and I see so much like hunger and desire from them to get plugged in, to do well, and to learn. And what I decided was after each meetup, I take them out for pizza and mentoring the next week because I don't have a lot of time to connect with them.
That could be a secondary business, pizza and mentoring.
I know, right? I'm not sure it's a very profitable one working with college students, but yeah. And so I take them out as an opportunity to pour back into them, talk about their experience. And I'm seeing changes in them. You know, they're becoming more outspoken. They're, you know, looking at you in the eye more. They're understanding what it looks like to dress professionally, to speak professionally, what it means to have professional posture. And it means so much to them. And so I think that also giving back to who works with you, who volunteers, whoever is a part of your team, especially if you're working with community building, is fundamental because this is the face of your community. And so they need to feel like they've been poured into and cared for as well. And if they have seen that as an example from myself and whoever else comes with me to these pizza and mentoring, they then have the example of what they can replicate in the meetups and beyond, right? Whatever circles that they're leading in as well.
Have you ever thought, obviously you've got an entrepreneurial mindset now, and as the Fort Lauderdale Tech Meetups obviously mature now, you've been doing this for a few years now.
2 years.
And 2 years now. And have you thought what's next from is there another city that you're thinking of that Julia can plug into and look at the market and see that it might be an area of opportunity to have tech meetups in potentially other cities? Is that some, or are you looking to just continue to mature the area and what you're doing today with Fort Lauderdale?
It's a very timely question because
We're breaking news here on the podcast.
I just finished an accelerator program called Amplify. It's led by Nelson Telemaco. You know Nelson,
yeah, I know
right?
Nelson. Sure, yeah.
This is his second cohort, and it's a accelerator for Christian founders who are building businesses that they want to walk with biblical principles. Essentially, I won't go too deep into it. That'll become another rabbit hole. But it was really, if you're a founder and you're listening and you're struggling with direction, I really encourage you to be a part of an accelerator program, because when you're in the business, and perhaps you guys can relate to this, it can be hard sometimes when you're really deep into the operation to think strategically and to take
absolutely.
that step out to think big picture. And an accelerator program forces you to do that. And you're along other peers who help challenge you in that way. And so I just concluded this accelerator program. We started in January, and it really challenged me to amplify my vision for what I'm building. And I started to reframe it. I'm like, okay, so I've been doing the Fort Lauderdale Tech Meetup. I now have the Founder Tactics podcast. But what's the greater umbrella that kind of covers all of this? And that's when I started to shift my perspective and my vision for Founder Tactics as a media platform to connect founders to community. So to other founders and to people who want to support founders. And so the podcast is also an aspect of the business that I want to, professionalize more, have a plan to grow it and scale it to get traction with the podcast. And the tech meetup, I don't see myself replicating how big of an operation it's been here in Fort Lauderdale. I never expected that it would get this big. I'm very thankful. It's incredible. And it's been such a blessing to myself and to many others. But I could see us doing pop-up events throughout the US, perhaps to start, and doing live podcast recordings, right? So the Founder Tactics podcast is a podcast about entrepreneurs and the communities that shape them, which essentially means, who are the people, the network, the relationships, and the community that help them succeed? Because entrepreneurs don't succeed alone. There are people who come around them and that support them in that journey. And so having the possibility of, sharing this mission and helping founders think about building through a community lens is really important for what we're building. So pop-up events could be that. I've thought about also in the future doing courses to help people think about how to do community building, how founders can community build for themselves as well. Maybe merch, a book. So thinking of it as a media platform instead of just maybe an isolated event that we would be replicating.
Very good. Very entrepreneurial of you.
Yeah. You talked about founders don't do this alone. So with the exception of your husband, which you mentioned him as a critical person, who's been in the room with you? Who has had the most influence or has given you the most support on your journey? And tell us about
even though I'm a solo founder, I feel really supported by so many people. So 2 of my former bosses are people who I reach out constantly for feedback, for counsel, in moments that I need a brainstorm with someone. They're just people that I built really great relationships with. They've become very close friends. And so if for founders or aspiring founders out there that are asking themselves like, man, who's going to support me? Honestly, it can be like former peers you worked with. It can be professionals in the market that you admire and that you want to reach out to and gather their perspective. And I think that support can look different with different people. So perhaps with people that I'm closer with and that I have a stronger relationship with, maybe that are friends, that are professionals that I admire, I'm getting their support, I don't know, maybe once or twice a month, like checking in with them, asking for advice. And then there's strategic partners that have come in, right? So the Flow Building is one of them, and their team have been a strategic partner to support what we're doing, and they're very aligned with the values of community, and it's what they're building out for their residences and co-working space and everything that they're doing. So I think that there's, the aspect of strategic partners that need to be an integral part of your company, which the Flow building is, which now the Broward students are also. I have some social media vendor that I work with that supports. And then there's the support that you get like more from like an advising perspective, which are these professionals that I reach out to, being part of an accelerator program, and being really intentional and not being afraid to ask for advice or asking somebody out for coffee. Sometimes it's one conversation over coffee can clear your mind over something you've been struggling with for weeks or months. And so as a founder, you have to be resourceful. You have to reach out to everyone and throw your ideas and not be afraid to put your ideas out there so that you can get that feedback.
So that was my follow-on question, maybe for both of you, because you've been around founders longer than I have. Are founders by nature willing to ask for help? Or is it a broad spectrum? And then I would turn that a little bit further and say, are the successful ones the ones that ask for help? Do you see anything there? What do you find with founders by nature?
Well, I'm curious to know what Jim would have to say.
Yeah, right?
Well, thank you for turning this table.
Yeah,
right. But look, I think it's changed. I think the dynamic, the paradigm has changed. So when I grew up,
Sure.
you didn't have the access and the tools and the knowledge base, and the idea of mentorship was scattered.
Yeah.
So it wasn't as formalized today. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs, my decades and above, perhaps even, that were more solo, inward looking.
Yeah.
Very close networked, reached out to the neighbor, the friend, the church leader, whoever that might be. Today's generation, Julia's generation, I think have a lot more access to tools and so forth. So they're a lot more open to the idea of being a recipient of feedback and resources, and then vice versa, tap into those as well. So that's just my opinion. What are your thoughts?
Do you feel like over time, like as a founder, that you evolved in that path? Like perhaps we're more isolated at first and now have like spread out to start to see the benefits of having that more ample community?
I love the fact that the podcaster here has turned the podcast back on to me.
Coming back.
But to answer your question, absolutely. So yes, as I've matured, I've become much more oriented into looking at resources, tapping into others, doing more of the, learning. As I've been a mentor now for many years, I feel blessed that I've been able to be a recipient of people that a younger generation that give me new ideas and suggestions. I love that. I love that to be the recipient of that. So my mindset has changed as I've matured as well.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Are you going to ask me a follow-up question?
I mean, I could. I'm holding back a little bit.
Well, I want to turn the table because this is your podcast, and I'm very, as I said, I'm very proud of you, how you started. We've had conversations before, and I very much appreciate, I mentioned about mentoring, and you've supported the venture mentoring team, and you've been very paying it forward mindseted as well. So not only. And I love that because you're a burgeoning entrepreneur, but you're also equipped with the understanding of continuing to pay it forward, that it's never too late to do that. So as you look at the market, because you're now a steward of this, where you've started with Cambridge Innovation Center, just here locally, geographically, and now where you are today, where is it going from a marketplace? Because you're tapped into, at least from a South Florida geographic perspective, you're tapped into mid-management, senior management, frontline folks in tech, and you're hearing from them. What are you hearing from them are the challenges of what they are experiencing at South Florida, and where are they thinking that this marketplace is going?
Yeah, I think that some of the challenges have definitely been how much everything has been concentrated in Miami. You have Fort Lauderdale, you have West Palm Beach, and in part, I think that's why, the Meetup has been so successful, is because there hasn't been as much startup activity and resources in Broward and Palm Beach County as much as there has been in Miami-Dade. And so there's an incredible amount of gratefulness that we now are building this community locally, right? I see a lot of technical talent really curious and interested in building companies, folks that are kind of poking around and looking for a little bit more of that independence. I think that after COVID, a lot of folks started to question their values and what they were doing with their time. And we see that there's a lot more people going independent. Solo founders, that market is growing. There's a lot more people wanting to innovate, and they're wanting to connect with people to exchange ideas. I think that there is, a talent challenge here in South Florida, in that I do think that there is good talent here, but it doesn't seem to be connecting as easily with local companies. So we lose talent at times, but we've also attracted people from different cities. So I think it's kind of too early to be able to say, where is the market going? But look, we're seeing growth in Broward through the Fort Lauderdale Tech Meetup. There's now several other tech meetups happening in the Broward region, which is a great sign of a maturing ecosystem. Is the
when
density.
There's competition in the space and what have you, and that there's a lot of opportunity for all.
Of course, and it's more density, right? That's important for people to be meeting more and to be doing more business together and connecting and having, these opportunities. And we're seeing the same in Palm Beach County as well. There's more meetups happening there. There's 1909 that's up there. There's, I've heard of some big schools that are opening now, universities that are opening in Palm Beach. Isn't that right?
Vanderbilt.
Yeah, there you go. So, we're seeing that the tech community is spreading out more in South Florida. And I think that will be to our advantage, because there's an incredible amount of, sharp professionals, founders, investors in Broward and West Palm that maybe don't want to drive all the way down to Miami to do business, but they need that proximity to deploy capital, to invest, to, do any sort of level of business. So I think that's going to add a lot of value to South Florida as we keep doubling down on more of the Tri-County versus just focusing on Miami.
So getting back to sort of your mission in those conditions, what are the challenges that you face right now? What do you bump up against that you kind of feel like, how am I going to get around this? And what does it say? What do you need from the rest of us in this ecosystem to sort of be thinking about if we're all trying to build it together?
What are some of my challenges? I think that for me, with what I'm building with Founder Tactics, because yes, I'm based in South Florida, but I'm really thinking beyond just South Florida. This is why also we record all of our panels and publish them on the Founder Tactics podcast, is because I don't want to restrict what we're doing just to those four walls, right? I want to be able to amplify those stories to anyone who is eager to learn. And so my challenge really is, how do we continue to build out our reach through the podcast, through possibly hosting throughout the U.S. And I actually think that's really beneficial to South Florida, because people will look back to see, well, where's the root of this? Where did this start?
Origin
and that
story
actually is
here.
great for South Florida. And if I'm putting out an ask, we certainly are always looking for sponsors for the Fort Lauderdale Tech Meetup and companies that want to promote their services to the tech community at large, right? We have 60% C-level executives and founders that participate in our community. We have 4,000 people who have come through our events in the past 2 years. So we've grown a lot, and we would love to have the community support where we add value to them as business owners, and they add value to us and continue to fuel this growth. Because essentially, the Fort Lauderdale Tech Meetup is what has been the driving revenue for Founder Tactics, right? So we work in a sponsorship model. We now do ticket sales as well. So you buy general admission ticket to join the meetup. And all of this to continue making this sustainable and for us to continue building out our vision. And you need money for that, right? And I'm not looking for investors. I'm, a bootstrapped company, and I don't have plans to change that at the moment. And so really, as people attend the tech meetup and, leverage it as a platform for advertising and marketing for their company, that will actually really help our mission as well.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So Julia Lucidi, podcast host, entrepreneur, mentor, you do so much. How do people get a hold of you, your podcast?
Yeah.
Where can they hear it, see it? And then the tech meetups. How do they get a hold of you or the organization with the tech meetups?
Yeah, so you can reach me at hello@foundertactics.com. You could attend a Fort Lauderdale Tech Meetup by visiting fortlauderdaletechmeetup.com. And the podcast is Founder Tactics with Julia Lucidi, available on all platforms, and would love for you to listen, follow, subscribe, so that you can tune into the stories of founders and how they reach success by leveraging their community as well.
Terrific. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to be on our podcast today.
Yeah, no, this is great. Thank you so much.
Good to have you.
Remember to subscribe, like, and share the Center Live podcast and follow us on all social media. If you're interested in sponsoring or appearing on the podcast, please email Levan Center Live. Our email is innovation@nova.edu.